No one expected Jasmine Crockett to challenge a Supreme Court judge until she said one sentence that made the entire courtroom fall silent. The moment the courtroom doors swung shut, the atmosphere changed, not gradually, but instantly, like someone had cut a wire connected to every whisper in the room. A heavy silence dropped over the space, the kind that makes people straighten in their chairs without even realizing they're doing it, the kind that tells everyone present something important is about to happen. Reporters who had moments earlier been tapping on their phones and whispering to one another suddenly froze mid-sentence. Their fingers hovered above their screens. Their eyes darted toward the front, wide and alert. Attorneys who had been flipping through folders or organizing their notes stopped mid-motion, hands suspended in the air. Even the gallery, crowded with citizens, activists, and the curious, leaned forward as if pulled by an invisible force. Nobody needed to be told. Nobody needed an announcement. Everyone already understood. This wasn't just another hearing. This was the confrontation people had been waiting weeks to witness. The moment Judge Elida Kagan, sharp-minded, cool-headed, seasoned by decades of legal storms, would finally face the rising political force known as Jasmine Crockett. Crockett, whose razor-sharp questioning had already shaken hearings across the nation. Crockett, whose fearlessness had made her a viral sensation overnight. Crockett, whose refusal to be bullied had become both a warning and a legend inside political circles. Judge Kagan entered with a calm confidence that belonged to someone who had seen nearly every kind of attorney, every kind of argument, and every kind of dramatic courtroom stunt. She expected firmness. She expected pushback. Her expression said she was ready for strategy, rhetoric, and legal fire. But what she didn't expect, what she couldn't have predicted, was Jasmine Crockett refusing to back down, even for a single heartbeat. As Crockett rose from her seat, an almost electric shift rippled through the rows behind her. It wasn't about her reputation or her past moments. It was the energy she carried now, quiet, controlled, but unmistakably powerful. She didn't rush. She didn't fumble with papers or glance nervously at the judge. She didn't check who was watching. Instead, she walked to the podium with the deliberate, steady confidence of someone who wasn't just prepared, she was purposeful. Someone who knew exactly what she was about to say would land with the weight of truth. In that moment, before a single word was spoken, Judge Kagan's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with recognition. She'd seen thousands of attorneys take positions like this. Some came shaking, some came rehearsed, some came overconfident. But Crockett, she came ready to fight for her point without fear, without apology, and without hesitation. The opposing counsel shifted uncomfortably. They had spent weeks trying to undermine her, picking apart her statements, questioning her credibility, attempting to twist the narrative in every way possible. Yet now, watching her stand at the podium, their confidence cracked. They had prepared arguments. They had prepared interruptions. They had prepared objections. What they had not prepared for was a woman who walked into the room carrying the kind of determination that could silence an entire courtroom without even speaking. Crockett placed her hands calmly on the podium. Her presence alone demanded the room's attention. No theatrics, no dramatic gestures, just pure, unwavering focus. And for Judge Kagan, this was the moment, the unmistakable moment, she realized she was not facing a typical attorney. She was facing someone operating on a different fuel, truth and conviction. Kagan leaned back slightly in her chair, studying her. She expected legal arguments, yes. She expected firm statements. But this intensity, this composure, this fearlessness, she didn't expect that. A quiet tension tightened the air between them. The judge with decades of experience.
the attorney rising as one of the most formidable voices in Washington. This wasn't a routine exchange. This wasn't a standard hearing where arguments would bounce back and forth politely. No, this was going to be a showdown. Two powerful forces, one courtroom, and a truth that was finally about to be spoken, without fear, without pause, and without backing down.
Your Honor, Crockett began, her voice controlled but electrified with purpose. We're here today because the truth has been twisted long enough, and I'm not going to let it stay that way. The words didn't just echo. They landed. Heavy, precise, undeniable. There was no quiver in her tone, no uncertainty in her posture, not even the slightest tremor in her breath. From the very first second, she spoke like someone who knew exactly what she was standing on and what she was standing against. No hesitation, no nervous breath, no polite softening to make others comfortable. From her opening sentence, the message was unmistakable. She came to fight for the facts, not for permission. A quiet ripple went through the courtroom. Judge Elena Kagan, never one for theatrics, lifted a single brow. It was subtle, so subtle that a casual observer might have missed it entirely. But anyone who had spent years watching judges knew what that small gesture meant. It meant, this attorney is not like the others. Because Crockett wasn't posturing for the cameras. She wasn't auditioning for a headline. She wasn't trying to sound impressive. She was there to correct the record, and she was ready, more ready than anyone else in the room, to challenge every distortion, every half-truth, and every carefully crafted political spin that had been thrown her way over the past weeks. Across the courtroom, the opposing counsel shifted in their seats. Once confident, once smug, once convinced they had cornered her, they suddenly looked uncomfortable. Almost nervous. They whispered to one another, flipping through documents as if hoping to find a lifeline. Because they had prepared for debate. They had prepared for counter-arguments. They had prepared for the usual, predictable courtroom back and forth. But what they had not prepared for was this level of control, this level of clarity, this level of unwavering conviction wrapped in precision and composure. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her strength came from the calm firmness underneath every word, like steel beneath velvet. She began laying out the facts, one by one, each detail placed carefully and deliberately, as if she were adding weights onto a scale the judge herself would eventually have no choice but to acknowledge. With every sentence, the tension in the room shifted, not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily and unmistakably. Reporters leaned forward, eyes narrowing, fingers poised above keyboards but frozen in the air. Even they could sense it. This wasn't just an argument. This was a dismantling. Her clarity cut straight through the noise. No wasted words, no rhetorical flourishes. Every point she made sliced through the opposing narrative like a sharp blade, exposing weaknesses the other side hoped no one would notice. The opposing counsel attempted to take notes, fast, frantic scribbles that only made them look even more unsure. Every time Crockett revealed another overlooked detail, their faces tightened a little more. Judge Kagan, meanwhile, watched intently. At first, she sat with her usual expression of neutrality, professional, unreadable, unmoved. But as Crockett continued, something began to shift. Her eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in focus. Her posture straightened, ever so slightly. Her gaze sharpened. She wasn't just listening, she was learning. Because Crockett wasn't delivering a rehearsed speech. She wasn't reciting talking points. She was revealing a truth that had been buried under layers of spin and manipulation.
With each passing moment, Judge Kagan's expression changed, from neutral to attentive to something close to impressed. And that transformation didn't happen often, not in a courtroom like this, and certainly not in front of dozens of cameras waiting to analyze her every blink. But Crockett had earned it. This was no ordinary attorney who stumbled into the spotlight by luck. This was no political figure trying to build a moment for social media. This wasn't someone searching for applause. This was Jasmine Crockett, fully present, fully prepared, and fully in command of the room. Her arguments didn't just challenge the opposing counsel, they cornered them. Her clarity didn't just expose their weaknesses, it shattered their strategy. Her presence didn't just shift the energy, it redefined it. By the time she paused for her next point, everyone in the courtroom knew one thing with absolute certainty. Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to survive the moment. She was there to own it. And Judge Kagan, seasoned, experienced, unshakable, recognized exactly what she was witnessing. A legal force, a political voice, a woman who refused to be silenced, minimized, or pushed aside. In that moment, Crockett wasn't just presenting an argument. She was making a statement. And the entire courtroom, judge included, was listening.
Halfway through Crockett's argument, something happened, something so subtle yet so powerful that everyone in the courtroom felt it before they even realized what it meant. Judge Elena Kagan leaned forward. It was a small movement, a shift of maybe an inch. But in a courtroom, small movements can speak volumes. And this one said everything. Judge Kagan did not lean forward because she was confused. This was a woman who had spent decades dissecting complicated legal arguments. Confusion rarely visited her bench. She did not lean forward because she was skeptical. Her skepticism usually showed in a raised eyebrow or a slow, measured pause, not a physical shift like this. No. Judge Kagan leaned forward because she realized something powerful, something undeniable. Jasmine Crockett was revealing truths that no one else had dared to speak aloud. It wasn't just the facts she was laying out, it was the way she delivered them, with clarity, precision, and the kind of courage that made even seasoned attorneys sit up straighter. The opposing counsel noticed it immediately. Their comfortable confidence began to crack. They could sense where the momentum was going, and they didn't like it, not one bit. They tried to interrupt her, once, then again. But Crockett didn't flinch, didn't break her rhythm, didn't even acknowledge their attempt to derail her. Without turning her head, without raising her voice, she delivered a line that froze the entire room. "Counsel will wait." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, electric. Every pair of eyes darted toward her. Even Judge Kagan looked up, not with disapproval, but with a spark of something closer to admiration. Because in that moment, Crockett wasn't just speaking, she was commanding. She stood rooted to the podium like an anchor in a storm, not a tremor in her voice, not a flicker of doubt. She controlled the space without force, just presence. And then came the moment that changed everything. Crockett paused, adjusted her papers, and revealed a detail so powerful, so overlooked, that the opposing attorneys actually froze. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't theatrical, it was simply true. A detail buried deep in the evidence, a detail the opposition assumed would go unnoticed, a detail that, once spoken, exposed their entire narrative as incomplete, inconsistent, and possibly intentional in its misdirection. She laid it out with calm precision, step by step, making it impossible for anyone to ignore. The courtroom reacted instantly. Murmurs spread through the gallery like a wave. Reporters who moments earlier had been quietly listening snapped to life, pens flying across notebooks, fingers hammering keyboards.
Some of them exchanged wide-eyed looks. They knew when a case had shifted. They knew when a moment had cracked open something bigger. And this was one of those moments. Judge Kagan didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. She simply leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, but in deep, calculating focus. She was processing, analyzing, reevaluating everything she'd heard so far, because she recognized what everyone else was slowly realizing too. This, right here, was the turning point. Not the closing argument, not the final statement, but this discovery, spoken fearlessly and backed by evidence, had just shifted the entire trajectory of the hearing. The opposing attorneys exchanged nervous glances. They flipped frantically through their documents, desperate to find something, anything, that could counter what Crockett had just revealed. But their silence said the truth. There was no comeback. There was no correction. There was no saving their argument. Jasmine Crockett had exposed the weakness at its core, and she wasn't done. As she continued, her voice steady and unwavering, it became painfully clear to the opposition, then undeniably clear to Judge Kagan. Crockett wasn't backing down because she didn't have to. She wasn't running on emotion. She wasn't relying on clever rhetoric. She wasn't bluffing or stretching the truth. She had facts, strong ones, dangerous for anyone who had tried to manipulate the narrative. And by the time Crockett finished that section of her argument, the courtroom was different, changed, awakened. Judge Kagan's expression was no longer neutral. Her attention was fully locked on Crockett. Her respect, rare, earned, and unmistakable, was visible in the tight focus of her gaze. Everyone knew it. Everyone felt it. This wasn't just another attorney making her case. This was a woman standing on the solid ground of truth and shaking the entire room with it.
The opposing counsel attempted one last move, their final card, a desperate one. They had lost control of the narrative. Crockett's precision had dismantled their arguments one by one. Her confidence had exposed cracks in their strategy they never expected anyone to notice. But instead of responding with facts, evidence, or logic, they resorted to an old, predictable tactic. They claimed that Jasmine Crockett was being overly emotional. A murmur swept across the courtroom, not loud but unmistakable. Reporters exchanged glances. Members of the gallery rolled their eyes. Even a few attorneys on the sidelines winced, recognizing the move for what it was. A classic attempt to undermine a powerful woman by attacking her tone instead of confronting her truth. Old, lazy, transparent, and very, very weak. Judge Kagan opened her mouth to respond, but she never got the chance. Before the judge could say a single word, Crockett leaned in just slightly. Not aggressively, not theatrically, just enough to show that she was stepping fully into the moment. Her voice was calm, cool, and sharpened to a blade's edge. "Your Honor," she said, "the truth doesn't need emotion. It needs courage." The line hit the room like a shock wave. Gasps escaped from different corners of the gallery. A few wows floated through the silence. Even the reporters, trained to stay neutral, couldn't hide their reactions. Pens paused in midair. Screens froze. Eyes widened. And then something incredibly rare happened. Judge Elena Kagan pressed her lips together and looked down for a moment. For anyone unfamiliar with her, it was subtle. But to those who had watched her for years, that tiny gesture spoke volumes. It was the closest she ever came to showing approval in the middle of a hearing. A silent acknowledgement. Crockett wasn't just right, she was powerful. But Crockett wasn't finished. She straightened slightly, letting her words settle before delivering the next line with the kind of controlled precision that made the entire courtroom hang on to every syllable. "And if courage makes anyone uncomfortable today," she continued, her voice steady as steel, "that says more about their arguments than about my tone." Silence. Not a normal silence, but the heavy, charged silence of a room realizing it has just witnessed a decisive blow. The kind of silence that signals a shift in power so dramatic that everyone feels it in their chest. The opposing counsel didn't immediately respond. They couldn't. Their faces flushed, their shoulders sagged. The confident smirks they'd worn at the start of the hearing had completely vanished. You could feel the defeat radiating from them. It was over. Not officially, not yet, but emotionally, strategically, and logically, the battle had been decided. Their papers meant nothing now. Their objections held no weight. Their earlier confidence had evaporated in an instant. They slumped back in their seats, trying to hide just how completely Crockett had dismantled them, but failing miserably. Meanwhile, the gallery buzzed with energy just beneath the surface. People shifted. People nodded. People looked at each other with that silent shared expression that meant, "We just saw something extraordinary." Judge Kagan finally turned her gaze back toward Crockett. But this time, her expression wasn't neutral, guarded, or even analytical. It was unmistakable. Respect. Deep, earned respect. The judge didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her eyes said enough, her posture said enough, the set of her jaw said enough. Because in that moment, Judge Kagan realized something fundamental about the woman standing before her. Jasmine Crockett was not someone you could intimidate, not someone you could dismiss, not someone you could silence with tired tactics or weak accusations. She wasn't just another attorney making noise in a courtroom. She was someone whose voice carried weight, someone who stood on unshakable ground, someone who spoke truths without fear, even when others tried to weaponize her strength against her. And most importantly, she was someone you had no choice but to listen to. The hearing hadn't ended yet, but the message had already been delivered and received. Crockett had won something far more powerful than a single argument. She had won the room, she had won the judge's respect, and she had shown everyone watching that her strength wasn't a threat to the truth. It was the truth's greatest weapon. When Judge Elena Kagan finally spoke, the entire courtroom seemed to freeze in place. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of silence that felt alive. Even the ticking clocks on the wall seemed to soften, as if they too were waiting for the judge's next words. Judge Kagan adjusted her glasses, glanced down at her notes, and then looked up, directly at Jasmine Crockett. "Attorney Crockett," she said slowly, each word chosen with precision, "your arguments are clear, well-supported, and necessary." That pause, that deliberate, weighted pause before the word necessary, hit the room like thunder rolling across the floor. People in the gallery sat straighter. Reporters jerked their heads up from their laptops. Even the opposing counsel's eyes flicked toward the judge, as if hoping she didn't mean what it sounded like she meant. But she did. Judge Kagan wasn't just acknowledging Crockett's legal points. She wasn't just complimenting her clarity or her preparation or her evidence. She was acknowledging something deeper, something far rarer, something far more powerful. She was acknowledging her courage. Because what Crockett had done in that courtroom wasn't easy. She challenged narratives others tiptoed around. She spoke truths others softened. She stood firm where others backed down. She occupied space that many tried to shrink around her. And the judge recognized every bit of it. For a moment, just a moment, the courtroom seemed to breathe again. Not because the tension had disappeared, but because the truth had settled into the room so solidly that no one could ignore it anymore. The truth had weight now. It had shape. It had a voice. And that voice belonged to Jasmine Crockett. Across the courtroom, the opposing attorneys exchanged defeated glances. They knew what the judge's words meant. They knew the shift that had just taken place. This wasn't a neutral acknowledgement. This wasn't politeness from the bench. This was the judge marking a turning point in the case. A point created entirely by Crockett's refusal to back down. As Crockett began gathering her papers, she didn't smile, she didn't smirk, she didn't revel in the moment. She didn't need to. Her composure stayed steady, dignified, and focused, just as it had been from the moment she first stood at the podium. Because for her, this wasn't about winning the room. It wasn't about going viral. It wasn't applause. It was about the truth. The judge knew it, the attorneys knew it, and everyone watching, inside the courtroom, and those who would soon watch the clips online, felt it in their bones. This wasn't just a victory. It was a demonstration, a reminder, a statement. Jasmine Crockett didn't shift the trajectory of the case because she was loud. She didn't shift it because she was dramatic, and she didn't shift it because she was emotional or confrontational. She shifted it because she was unshakably grounded in the facts and fearless enough to speak them even when others tried to silence her. As she stepped back from the podium and returned to her seat, her face remained calm. No celebration, no outward reaction. Her silence was its own message. The truth already made the impact. There's nothing left to add. The judge watched her, her expression still carrying the weight of respect. It wasn't admiration for Crockett's performance. It was admiration for her integrity. And the courtroom felt that too. Something meaningful had happened, something that would echo beyond the walls of that hearing room, something that would ripple through social media, through news headlines, through public conversations around the country. Because this wasn't just a legal moment, it wasn't just a strong argument, it wasn't just a courtroom exchange. It was a lesson, a reminder, a demonstration of what happens when the truth has a voice strong enough to stand its ground, even when challenged, doubted, interrupted, or dismissed. When the truth stands firm, even power must listen. As Crockett closed her folder and sat down, the impact lingered in the air, heavy, real, and unforgettable. And soon, when the footage hit the internet, millions would see exactly what the courtroom had witnessed. Not just a lawyer making a point, not just a judge acknowledging a fact, but a moment where courage reshaped the narrative, and the world had no choice but to pay attention.